Hey, darlings. Here we are to talk about again this 20. Ooh, that's way too fat a pen. Let's try this one. This 2018 prose passage from the AP English Lit exam. This is Zenobia from Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel Blithedale Romance. So this video continues the step-by-step process of me tackling this prompt. You should definitely have it with you. If you want this to be at all useful and not literally the most boring thing you've ever seen in your life, you should definitely have the passage with you. And keep in mind as we go that everyone has different processes and thoughts about all of these passages. This is just one way to do it and one set of conclusions to come to. This is also the kind of thing that I do for fun. So remember that this can be very quick and light or just as deep and ridiculous as your own needs, time, and energy permit. So here's what I'm going to do in this video. First, I'll follow just my own process of using multiple layers of annotation. And obviously, or maybe not obviously, those are coming from multiple readings, so that you can compare your thinking with mine. And I will also show you an argument tree, which is just one of the strategies that I like to use to plan. This is definitely not the only way to do it, and I often change the process myself, but this is just one pathway that I've found to give myself the structure that I need to process these really dense passages at the level that I need to do it for success in AP Lit. So my process for this video is going to be a walkthrough of annotations. You can already see why I need to go back and spruce up my annotations so they're legible while other people are reading them. So first I'll do a walkthrough of the annotations just so you can compare your thinking of mine on specific evidence and ideas. Multiple lines of reasoning and different perspectives are always helpful in your analysis. So maybe we'll see something similarly, or maybe we'll see it differently, and that will enhance our points of view. There's a video link in the description if you have a desire to watch the process of me going through these annotations, and another link to a general overview of the process that I usually use for multiple readings, planning, and writing. Then once I'm done with that, I will give you another walkthrough of my plan and just my thought process when I was making it and how I kind of moved through it and was thinking about things. As always, when you're kind of recording your thoughts with somebody else or for somebody else, it seems like it takes a long time, but it's important to note that this goes fast. I read for about 15 minutes, and that's a first reading for the literal, and a second reading for, deeper stuff or whatever. And then I take about 5 minutes to plan, which leaves me plus or minus 20 minutes to write. And when I'm doing the writing, I'm definitely going back and forth between my sort of argument tree that I use just for general structure and remembering what I wanted to say where, and my annotations. I annotate heavily and I use those annotations heavily. So anyway, during the 20 minutes I have to write, like I said, I'll be referring to the plan for general structure and key points, and to my annotations for the specific evidence I'll use and my thoughts on integrating that evidence into my line of reasoning. So also, you can check the description. I'll put some mile markers in there so you can watch the part of the video that you think is going to be the most useful to you. All right, so moving right along, here are my annotations. I spruced them up from the real-time ones because there's no way that anybody could read them. So on the first reading, that's the green part over here. And I break this up into chunks because I'm going to end up using this literal information. I like to be as specific with the literal as possible. I don't want to give some just general blanket statement about what's going on in the passage. So I try to have as much detail in the literal as possible because I find that very useful when I'm writing, making sure that I'm honoring what's actually happening in the passage and not getting too far away from it. I also noticed, and you can see in the pink up here at the top, here in this pink area. This prompt happened to provide what I thought were some very helpful hints about context and where these characters are coming from in terms of their values. And then you can see my blue annotations over here. These are things that I noticed on second reading, and I've made some notes about evidence that I'm going to use. You can see it underlined. You can see arrows going around. I've made some notes in the comments, in the margin over here on the right-hand side. I'm going to talk about symbolism. I'm seeing this character is kind of judgmental. There's a juxtaposition between the old and the new, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see the orange annotations, where when I'm going back to do my plan, I'm like, all right, let me jump into this one more time. And obviously, I'm not going to have time to write about every single thing that I noticed while I was reading this passage. So I use that kind of, I'm not even going to call it a third reading, but just to go back and check it out right quick so that I can think about what it is that I really want to say. And I made some notes about that. Anyway, so there are my annotations. And you can see that I've kind of drafted lots of sentences in my annotations because, I have ideas about what I want to say about things. I don't just underline a piece of evidence and keep it moving. I note, for instance, right here that, possibly he was in your thoughts when you spoke to us, and I indicated mind reader ? Because I want to make some comment about the narrator thinking that that they can get into Zenobia's mind. Okay, so how do I deal with the planning? Well, first I do the readings, and then I go back to the question. And this may happen in stages, or I may do it all at one time. I do definitely remind myself of the questions several times during the reading process, because sometimes it happens that you answer the wrong question, and that's terrible. Nobody wants that. And then I come up with a plan. So I just snipped this here, and it's ugly. No one could ever read this. But when I did this myself real time to write this essay, all of this purple that you see in here is the plan that I did for myself real time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to scroll down, and I'll just reconstruct this plan and kind of walk you through the thought processes that I had when I was making the plan. And remember also that I'm using an argument tree. If you look at this, you can see that it is a tree on its side. And I just like the metaphor of a tree because it's useful for me. So anyway, that's the original plan. So I'm going to go down here where I've got a clean sheet. Why is this carrying with me? Whatever, let me erase it. Where I've got a clean sheet so I can kind of walk you through what my thought processes were and how I decided that, how I decided and organized my thoughts for this passage. So one of the first things that I like to do, because in order to make an argument, we need to have some basic facts. And some of those basic facts are given to us in the context. So over here, this would be kind of the roots and soil where my tree is anchored. I just want to make some notes about literal facts that I think are salient to the argument that I'm about to make. So in the context, we learned that, in the context in the prompt, we learned that these people lived in this sort of utopian kind of environment, which is a big commitment and shows that they have similar values. They're also separating, and there's a split. This says that they're parting ways, and that is happening in a new setting. And I feel like, it says specifically that the new setting leads to some confusion in the relationship. All of that is literally stated in this passage, or in the prompt that comes with it. So that's going to be the basis. The next thing that I want to think about, and this is the thesis, the trunk of my tree. Here, we'll give it a little bit more body since it's the trunk. But this prompt asked me to characterize the narrator's attitude. And one of the things that I noticed was that there's a change in attitude. So I'm going to say that the narrator's attitude changes. And I also noticed, and I don't always do this in a thesis, but there are some pretty clear literary techniques here that maybe I want to highlight. Those for me, there's juxtaposition, dialogue, and symbolism, and word choice. But there's diction in everything, right? Dictionary. But the big argument that I want to make here, these are the devices that I'm going to use right here. But the big argument that I want to make is that there's this progression in the narrator's attitude. It kind of moves from confusion to shame to bitterness to judgment to this kind of like internal conflict that I'm thinking maybe has something to do with self-doubt. And then that leads the narrator to a desire to test and dominate Zenobia. So I'm always thinking too, and I'm going to switch colors here a little bit so that we can see the change in emphasis, but I'm always thinking about bigger issues. And this part of my planning has already led me to think that there's a clash in values, that maybe the narrator is intimidated. I'm kind of getting that sense by Zenobia and by the confusion, and that maybe there's some, well, that's no good. Maybe there's some insecurity and the narrator is projecting a little bit. Because the prompt is asking me just, hey, what's the attitude? Tell me. And so I'm like, all right, I'll tell you. But I need to be thinking for myself if I want to get to a higher level of analysis and potentially even sophistication point. I need to be thinking about multiple ways to interpret this and what larger context I can put it into. Okay, so now I've got my trunk of my tree, and I need to think about how I want to organize this. So one of the things that I noticed, and I indicated it here, is that there's this progression, and it doesn't necessarily happen in this order, but there's definitely, it actually happens pretty much in this order. And there's this sort of intensifying in the narrator's feeling, and it becomes, progressively more negative until we get to the point where this narrator feels that they've got a win against Zenobia. So usually the easiest way for me to organize, and this allows me to make most effective use of my annotations, and is just chronologically through the passage. And there are lots of different ways to organize. Different passages suggest different things, but and different prompts suggest different organizing strategies. But for this one, I'm just going to keep it simple and progress through here. And I think I'm going to have 3, maybe 4 paragraphs after my introduction. In the first one, I'm going to talk about how it is in the beginning. And then each of these is going to trace a progression. And then my last paragraph is going to be, why did things change so much? So I'm just going to organize by in the beginning, middle, and end. Then I need to start thinking about what evidence I'm going to use. So I'm just going to start adding little branches. And I'm not going to write it all down because it's all in my annotations. But I just know that for the first paragraph in my essay, which mirrors the first paragraph or so of the passage, I know I want to talk about the symbolism of light. I want to talk about the juxtaposition in settings. I want to talk about this idea of the secret mind and the fact that that equals an adversarial relationship. He's plotting against her. Then in this second paragraph, I think this is probably going to be my second body paragraph, I want to talk about this issue with values. He really hardcore starts to judge her in this first paragraph. I'm going to talk about all this sort of magical language where he almost calls her a witch because she can decide, how to present herself and how to look. And then this conclusion he makes that she is fake. Then in my next paragraph, which is sort of, I don't know, the end of the middle, no, body paragraph number 3, then I want to explore here the fact that I want to look at the dialogue here, where the narrator challenges with a question and Zenobia answers with a question. Then I want to talk about how when she finally gets a chance to speak for herself, she is sort of generous in her, her tolerance of different ways of living. And she comes across as fairly open-minded and specifically says, I'm not here to judge anybody. People can do what they want. Then the narrator responds by saying they need to decide what real is, and there's this idea of truth. Then I think I'm going to use my concluding paragraph. This is actually going to be my conclusion right here, to talk about the last snippet of the passage where she is the light, and that she, in the face of a challenge, becomes proud and self-possessed, and that all of this is based on his assumptions. So that's going to be the way that I organize it. This is going to be the first body paragraph, second body paragraph, third body paragraph, and conclusion. And that's just the way it worked out for me. I don't really have I always write X number of paragraphs or whatever. I just think about the argument that I want to make and what the best way is for me in the moment to put that together, given that there isn't a whole ton of time. All the time here, I'm considering these issues too. And I'm thinking through some critical lenses. And I want to make some notes to myself here about things that I want to address in my conclusion, because the more I think about it, I just have a lot of feelings about this. So usually my conclusion becomes things, for lack of a better term or a better explanation, things I get in my feelings about. So for this one, there are a few things I get in my feelings about. One is the idea of feminine power and how it doesn't matter who you are, who's looking at you. If you are a woman and you are confident and settled in your power, somebody's going to have an issue with it. This narrator acknowledges all the way at the beginning that they're confused and dazzled and don't know what to make of this, and then immediately starts blaming Zenobia for all of these feelings that the narrator is having. And I have a lot of feelings about that. So I actually think that this is going to be the more thematic argument that I center my essay around. So anyway, that's my planning process. I provided you a copy of the essay that resulted from this planning process. Most of the time it works out pretty much like this. I can march right through it, don't have to stop and think while I'm writing. Sometimes something falls through the cracks and I don't get to say everything that I meant to say, but hey, you only got 40 minutes, so what are you going to do? Anyway, hope that was helpful. Here's a happy face for you. Here's a peace sign for you. Here's some love for you. Have a good one.